Hello, and thank you very much for joining us on Upfront on JoyNews. So there's been lots of issues and lots of concerns about Ghana's testing capacity. Lots of issues to do with how many samples, for instance, has been tested, and even issues to do with whether or not, these tests that we're talking about are just individual tests or there are duplicates in them. For some of you, you've also questioned Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research's capacity to conduct the number of tests they say they have conducted. Today, our focus is on understanding how testing for COVID-19 is done. How about the pooling system that we're told of today? How does it ensure the credibility of the test? How long does it even take for us to know the results? And how is it communicated to the Ghana Health Service, which in turn has to communicate this to us? My name is Winston Amwa, and when we return after the break, I'll be introducing my guest, who is a senior research fellow at the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research. He takes part in the testing, and so would be able to help you and I understand exactly how the testing is done. This is Upfront. Stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us. So we've been joined by Dr. Kofi Boni, and Dr. Kofi Boni is a senior research fellow at the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research. He understands the testing system, and so will be helping you and I to have a better understanding of the testing system. Dr. Boni, thank you very much for joining us. So help us understand how the testing system for COVID-19 is done at the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research.
Thank you very much to Winston, and thanks for the opportunity. So when we start to talk about the testing, we have several testing algorithms that we use depending on the situation that we find ourselves in, and also the nature of tests that we are engaged or we are committed to. For the COVID, when we started doing the testing for the COVID-19, what we started doing was that we were testing individual samples, because at the time that we started somewhere mid of February, we were getting samples coming in, just trickling in one or twice in a day and all that. So we were able to do them individually and report immediately. But it got to a stage where we started having a lot of samples. That is when we started doing the mandatory quarantine and also the enhanced contact tracing. And then we started having samples in numbers about 1,000. In a day. Sometimes we can get about 5,000 samples in a day. So basically, the testing strategy or the algorithm that we were using then have to change so that we can meet the exigencies of the times. So what we did basically was a method that is known in science, which is called pooling. What this basically means is that if you have taken 10 samples, you can do pooling for 5 samples. But we decided to start doing the pooling with 10 samples. If I say 5 samples, what I mean is that we have 5 individual cases, then we pool them together. We take aliquots, or we take pieces of each sample and put it in one vial or one container. And that will be represented for the 5. Then we test that one. So when we test that one, then we get a negative response or a negative signal. That means all the 5 are negative. Then only the issue comes in when we get a positive signal. That means we have to go back and test the individual samples to find out which amongst the 5 is giving us the positive signal. So then they will report. When we do 10, the principle is the same. So we take 10 individual samples and we take aliquots or pieces of each of the 10 and put it in one vial. Then we test it. When it is negative, it's good for us because we have then saved reagents for testing for like 9 other people. But when it is positive, then we have to go back, then now test the individual samples that were involved in the pool of 10 to now tell us which amongst the 10 was giving us the positive. So this is the testing algorithm that we've been engaged in since we started doing the enhanced surveillance activities in order to be able to ramp up the testing.
Okay, so help us understand why you decided to go for, this particular means of testing. You've talked about if you test, say, 10 people and a test negative, if you pool 10 samples together and a test negative, then you save 9 reagents. Was it as a result of the kits that you decided to go for the pooling?
Yeah, so the reason, we are multiple, or let's say, maybe let me give you the 2 main reasons for doing that. The first reason was that, it's by intuition, we have worked on this contact tracing samples for some time, and we know that a lot of them are negative. In fact, about 95% of contact tracing samples that we get are negative. So then if we are going to test individual samples, which are in thousands, we are going to use a lot of reagents. So if we pool, we are going to get the same sample. Look, we are using an assay that is very sensitive, the PCR assay. The PCR assay has a very low detection limit. If we have a viral particle, which is even 1, in any of the samples, it will pick it up. In the same instance, if you put this viral particle, which is in one of the samples, and you just make a cocktail of samples, about 10 of them, it will still pick that one up. So if that is the case, then why not just combine that number of samples? Save us the time of testing 10 samples, save us the reagent of testing 9 other samples, then getting the same results. So why don't we do that? So one is because of the logistics that we have, and also the volumes of samples that we have. But that's the second reason.
So the challenge you had with logistics, led you to innovate something which is done elsewhere.
That is partly the reason.
Partly the reason, and also the volumes that you're receiving. Talking about the volumes, but for the pooling of these samples, what would have been your capacity, your testing capacity daily? If you are not pooling, how many tests can you conduct in a day?
We could have done a minimum of like 1,200 a day. But when we pool, we can do about 7,000 samples a day. But then what you also notice that apart from changing the strategy, we changed the number of personnel that were involved in the testing. At first, we were doing the normal shifts, which involved only one department within the institute. The institute has got 9 departments. But then when the samples, the volume of the samples went up, and at the time we were on a lockdown, the institute now invited the other departments that were at home. They've got also the expertise to do the testing that we're doing. So they brought them in, all the research assistants, all the technicians, all the research fellows, they brought them in. So we then ran a system of 3 shifts. We had 3 teams that were running a system of shifts, so that you have a team coming from 8 a.m. and closing at 8 p.m. Then the second team will start from 8 p.m. and run to the next day, 8 a.m. So one, we increased the number of people who were doing the testing, and also changed the strategy for testing. So this basically led to the numbers. The increase in numbers, but otherwise we would have been doing only 1,000 samples or close to 1,200 samples in a day.
Okay, but just by way of clarification, so assuming you had not also increased the number of, the working hours, would it have still remained at 1,200, or would have been less? And so then it becomes a case of having people working in 2 shifts, resulting in the 1,200.
Yeah, it could have been less. It could have been less. In fact, another thing that also led to maybe the increase was that the sample type along the way changed. Let me just explain a little bit. At first, because they are respiratory diseases or infections, you will take what is called the nasopharyngeal swabs. There's a swab that you put it either in your nose or your throat. And they put this in a small vial that contains a media. And they will bring it to the lab for testing. That procedure or that sample type is very easy to handle. But at some point, especially just before they started the enhanced contact tracing, the swabs in the system ran short. So basically, it got finished. So the health system now changed to what is called using the sputum or the phlegms to do the testing. It is also a good sample type, but handling it in the lab is difficult. So the procedure becomes a bit cumbersome, it takes more time. So that also brought some delays in there. So increasing the numbers helped us to manage that kind of load or the processing time to reduce it. Okay, so that one also helped. So many things came in. Yeah. So basically that.
Yes, help us understand those so many things that came in. Listening to you're telling us that in effect the unavailability of swabs, caused you to innovate, because then the new means of taking samples was taking too long a time to have you conduct a test on it. Am I right?
That's correct.
Great. But let's look at, also this particular way of testing in getting, the samples. Is there any difference between what you're likely to get if you had used the swabs and the sputum?
Not really. Not really. In fact, the sputum, because it's coming deep down your throat, has got quite a number of the viral particles that, if you are infected, it's got quite a number of the viral particles that we are expecting. But sputum, you have a lot. It's kind of viscous material and quite a lot. But you see, the swab, we are just using this stick with something like a cotton bar at the end and just running it through your throat. So a very small substance will come on it and we put it in the media. You see, so that one you don't have enough. But then again, if you are infected, the least that we have, we can still detect it. So we can talk about the numbers of viral copies that we'll get in the sputum. It could be more than the numbers of viral copies that we'll get using the swab. But because the assay that we use, that is the testing procedure, the testing mechanism that we are using, the PCR, is so sensitive, the listing there will be picked up.
Okay.
We are not measuring the viral load. That is a different thing. We're not doing quantitative testing. That is measuring the viruses that are involved. We are just doing qualitative, just telling whether it is there or not.
Okay.
So the list that it picks, we can just go ahead to give our test results.
Okay. So let's look at. You talked about how it takes a bit of time, with the sputum. So how long does it take to have test results coming out? And then when it comes to the swabs, which now are run out of supply, how long does it also take to get the results in?
If I give a scenario, assuming I have 10 swabs from 10 patients working on it, the processing time it will take me to work on the 10 swabs, maybe like 3 hours. 3 hours, that means I will have to, maybe 3 hours, 30 minutes, because I have to now process these swabs and do what's called extract the nucleic acid from the sample that has come, then put it in the machine. The machine takes close to 2 hours to run. That's the PCR machine. But you need to initially prepare the sample before you put it in the machine. So the machine taking close to 2 hours, and the initial processing taking a little bit about an hour for using the swab. On the other hand, if you are using the sputum, we have to add about 30 minutes to it. For the same 10 samples from patients who have provided sputum, because handling the sputum is a bit tedious. And you see, this is 10. We are talking about thousands of samples. On a day, we receive more than 5,000 when it got to the peak, when we're doing the enhanced surveillance testing. So you can imagine having all these sputum containers spread in front of the research assistant, and they are sorting, giving numbers, processing, going to extract. It was taking a long time. So if we had not increased the numbers of people doing the testing, it would have been very difficult for us to meet the time that we set for ourselves. So basically, we said for the contact tracing, we're reporting in 3 days. But for hospital or suspected cases that we receive, within 24 hours, we have to report. So that was the time that we were using to do our report.
Okay, I certainly would come back to you. Would need to understand why, if you have the test conducted in just, say 3 hours, 30 minutes, it would take you 24 hours to report, and why in contact tracing cases, sometimes it takes you, 3 days to report. This is Upfront on JoyNews. We'll go for a short break. When we return, we still have Dr. Kofi Boni, who's a senior research fellow at the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research. He's helping us understand how the testing for COVID-19 is, because there are many of you who have been raising issues. You've raised concerns about, Ghana's testing capacity and whether or not we, are getting the right results for our tests. Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break. Much for staying with us. This is Upfront on JoyNews, and this evening we're looking at how we can understand best, the testing for COVID-19, particularly by the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research. And we've been joined by Dr. Kofi Boni, who is a senior research fellow at the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research. So before we went on the break, you're talking about, how it takes, say, 24 hours if it's a hospital case or suspected case, and then when it comes to the enhanced contact tracing, it takes you 3 days. Why, knowing that it takes you just 3.5 hours to be done with the testing and the results are ready?
So basically, because of the numbers, I just mentioned that on a night or on a day, they usually bring the samples in the evening. You can get as many as 5,000 samples. So if we are churning out results on a daily basis for, let's say, 2,500 or 3,000, the normal shifts that we do, 3,000, certainly there will be a backlog, because if you constantly bring in this number of samples, 5,000, sometimes a little bit about 5,000 and all that, and we are churning out results of 3,000, 3,500 on a daily basis, certainly there will always be a backlog. So unless the samples start decreasing, you will have to try and clear the backlog. So what happened was that the samples that we received for contact tracing were not treated with urgency like the hospital samples, like the suspected cases. It's not like it's not important, but so contact tracing, maybe somebody has tested positive in the vicinity, then the people around, when they started the enhanced, they were taking so many people around who obviously may not even be showing any symptoms or may not clearly be sick. They will still take their samples. So the hospital cases were people who either are going through some hospital procedures and they needed results, or are quite sick and they needed results. So that one, when we get it, immediately we have to work on it. But for the ones that were contact traced, we were working from behind. So sometimes 2 days, sometimes 3 days, we just pick them from there. So what is there, pick it, and we try to work from there. So we're working on both the hospital suspected cases and the contact tracing. But contact tracing will take us some time. It takes us sometimes 3 days, sometimes 2 days because of the numbers. But the hospital cases, we're reporting it on a 24-hour basis. So basically, that is sheer numbers. That is what resulted in this 3-day churning out of the results.
So would I be right to say that you are the reason why sometimes it takes a long time for the Ghana Health Service to update their website on COVID-19 cases, because you probably might not have submitted the number of tests done and the results out of these tests to them?
No, I don't. I can't say we are the reason why.
Because you've just told us that in some instances it takes 24 hours, in others it takes 3 days. And so that probably would explain why sometimes in 3 days we haven't had any updates on the website when it comes to COVID-19.
No, you can't say we were the reason why. Look, the lab is testing, but we have a capacity to test, but we have gone beyond and we are stretching ourselves to do it. So certainly there'll be a backlog. We can say that partly we are the reason why, because we don't. If they are supposed to give real time, that is every day and every moment the results come, they have to report. We give them report every day. We give them reports. So, for example, we tested. In fact, they updated it today. But from Sunday, we have been testing, and results have been given them all the time. So they could have put the results that we had on Friday there, on Saturday, on Sunday there, on Monday there, before today, Tuesday. But maybe they decided to wait and put it there, because every day samples go out there. Every day samples go out there.
So in fact, for today, you've actually sent sample results to them based on.
Yes. So today sample results have gone out. So that means every day, but maybe they decide to get some number, or maybe they have a way. I don't know the criteria they use in reporting, but every day we send results or sample results to Ghana Health Service.
And ever since you started sending sample results to Ghana Health Service every day, has there been positive cases every day that you sent results to them?
Every day there are positive cases. Every day. I mean, since we started having positives, I mean, positive cases every day. But there was a time some people were saying that for 2 days they've not had any positive cases. Is that for 2 days there have not been any updates on the site? But we here know that we have results for every day, and every day they are positive. There are some days that we have so many positives that we wonder. The way we are doing it, I mentioned it earlier on about the pooling. If I'm working on 200 pools, 200 pools is 2,000 samples, because it's times 10. And if I'm to get even two of the pools coming out as positive, that means I'm going to get 20 samples to run them back. That is one other reason why we take the 3 days. You understand? Because if I work on 200 pools and I have to now go back, because there are two of them being positive, I have to go back and look for the 20 individuals and run them again, because they are in 2 pools. That means it's going to take me some time to. So certainly it will delay. If they are negatives, it goes faster, because you have run them short time, you are finished and you are reporting. But then if you have some positive signals, then you have to go back. So that one too is another, I can say, is another factor when it comes to reports. Testing, taking the 3 days for the contact tracing.
Okay.
But for the clinical cases, even if there are polls, we quickly go back, and the same day we need to report, because we are running 24 hours system.
I'll come back to the contact tracing bit. So have you sent today's test that you ran to the Ghana Health Service?
We do it in the evening. So there is what we do. In fact, let me just correct this point. You see, what we were doing at first was, when it started, you have a system of reporting. When there's a positive case, it has to go to the chair of the public health. Yes, the public health director, the director of public health.
Okay.
You see, that is Dr. Sarkodie.
Sure.
Or the deputy director, Dr. Franklin Asidu-Bequin. You see, so the director of institute or the head of the lab, will have to give the positive cases to him. Not only the cases, but the forms that comes with it will be scanned and sent to them. That's what they do. So they were reporting, especially the positive, they were reporting. They will go and see the patient and maybe counsel and report. But then along the way, we realized that it was taking time, because sometimes when we scan the forms and give it to them, it takes them some time for them to go ahead to do the reporting and all that. So now, in our data room, we have somebody with a phone, a dedicated phone. All that the person does is to call and report. So every form that comes with a sample has got contact details at the back of the form. So the person, normally the clinician or the health staff who took the sample, his contact details are there. So this our colleague will only call and tell, oh, the sample you brought today is positive, is negative, is pending results. That is when we are unpulling, something like that. So that is every day it goes out there. So for the Ghana Health Service, at the end of the day, the forms, we don't keep the forms here. The forms that we have scanned and we store the data has to go to Ghana Health Service. So it goes there. Sometimes they come and pick them up maybe a day or 2 days after or 3 days after. So now the channel of reporting has changed a little bit from what we started doing initially.
Okay, so daily, at what time do you inform the Ghana Health Service as to whether, on the number of cases you've tested and those that have tested positive and those that are negative? What time during the day do you report? At first,
when, like I said, that it has changed a little bit. At first, when we're giving to them directly, every day when we run the test and they are positive, the head of the lab will scan the forms and send it to them. Sometimes most of the time by email.
So just by way of clarification, is it that it is sent immediately there's a positive case?
Immediately the head of the lab comes to the lab and the results are ready. You go to the data room, the forms are there, it's scanned to the head of the lab, sit behind his computer, send it to them. Then sometimes call them, I have sent this. You see, so in recent times, because of the volumes, what we have done is, what we are doing is that we have a colleague of ours with a dedicated phone in the data room who calls the contact details of the person who delivered the sample or who brought in the sample and inform the person that this is what we have. So at the end of the day, or 2 days or 3 days later, the Ghana Health Service will send somebody to come and collect the forms. But then we have an update, we call something update of results, which is always sent to them.
Okay. That's understood. But just finally on this particular bit, so it is as and when the head of lab comes in that he would send to the Ghana Health Service, but at the end of the day...
The head of lab is always present.
Is always present. So when you have, so just another clarification, when you have the positive case, he then sends it to the Ghana Health Service, right?
Yes, that is what we started doing initially.
Okay, so
we send it to the investigators or the people who brought the samples in right away after reporting the positive.
Okay, so you talked about the fact that when it comes to the enhanced contact tracing, though it's very important, there is no urgency in it. But we also know that many of Ghana's cases are asymptomatic, Dr. Kofi Bonny. And so,
we have to prioritize.
Yes, but if I finish my question, you'll understand. So,
okay.
So if we have to prioritize, suspected cases from the hospitals and all of that over the enhanced contact tracing, we do know that there are instances that after, the suspected cases turn out to be negative, and the contact tracing cases turn out to be positive, and so that person is asymptomatic and is going around and probably getting into contact with people. Shouldn't we be looking at having or treating all those tests equally, and so once they come in, they're tested and there we go?
Yes, so there comes in the question of capacity. If you have 5,000 samples coming in on a single night, and which is testing, we have what you call the sputum bottles, you have to sort and all that. Certainly, you cannot test all the 5,000 in a day. So some will be behind. That will have to be tested the next day, or the next shift comes in and start testing it. So the reporting will not be the same day. It cannot be. So if it does up, then it start going further back. But we try to maintain 2 or 3 days. But you see, the hospital cases are not many. They are not many. And I'm not saying this because one is more important than the other. No. It's because of the sheer numbers. We are running them alongside. But because one is far more than the other, this one that is less will actually, go faster than the one that is more. That 5,000, we have only 20. 20 will finish it before the 5,000 will get to even half of it. So that is what happens. So it is not a deliberate attempt to maybe classify one as a more important sample than the other. But because of the sheer numbers, we are running it. We have to get to a time that it will not be as fast as the one that is less, because it is more.
And so because of the sheer numbers, naturally you would have to do some over others. And in this case, because of the fact that these are suspected cases, you normally would choose them over those that are coming from enhanced contact tracing, because you believe that all things being equal, these are cases that would not stand a less chance of testing positive.
We don't choose them over. We run them alongside, but because they are more, it will not finish as the less one. I mean, I don't know whether you understand.
Yes, I get you. I get you now.
So don't choose them over. We don't say that they are more important. We are running them alongside, but because these are more, certainly we can't finish this. Another shift will come and take over. So you see that the results for that one will delay, but this one would have been completed. But also you have to note that the suspected cases are ones that usually they hold the health staff, they keep them in isolation or they self-quarantine when the results come out before they come out, because usually they see themselves exposed. So they take this sample, they said, okay, now the person was highly, it's a high index, or it's a highly suspected case. He's showing all the symptoms, he was doing all that. So there's a possibility that the person is positive, and I have handled this case. So why don't I wait till I get the results before I leave the facility? Or let me go home, quarantine myself till the results come before I come out. So in these cases, we have to try and within a short time send them the results so that they can go about their business. But for the contact tracing, it's just because of the numbers. Just because of the numbers.
Okay, so let's look at the pooling. You talked about the fact that you could pool 10 together and all of that. Now, I think about 3 weeks ago, there was an announcement as part of the briefings that one person tested negative, haven't tested positive. He tested negative again. And then after the second test, which would have made him, recover, he tested positive again. So he tests positive, test negative, and then we're told that you're supposed to test, negative twice in order to say that you've recovered. Then he tests negative again.
Yes.
Now, if that is the case, Dr. Kofi Boni, can't it be the case that sometimes when we're doing the pooling, there could be instances that someone might test negative when indeed the person could be positive? In fact, Dr. Okuba, when he was here the last time,
about human error contributing to
he talked about false negative and sometimes false positives even. So can't there be a case of a false negative, and as a result we threw all of them out?
I will not sit here and say totally rule out that, but I have to be careful in saying that we have internal controls, we have quality assurance, we call them measures or controls that we use in working on this sample. Look, we can run a whole batch. Let me just give you this perspective. When we do one run has a plate that takes 96 samples. 96, that is one run within less than 2 hours. That's how come we can run so many. And we have about 4 machines that can do this 96 each. So assuming all the 4 machines are working, so let's say within 4 hours, 4 machines will produce results for 96 times 4. And assuming these are pools, so it is 960 times 4. We run a lot of samples, yes, so there could be the human factor which will lead to errors. We cannot rule out that because there are a lot of samples and there's pressure to release results in time. But then we have these quality assurance mechanisms that we put in place. For each run that we do, we have what is called the positive control, the negative control, and the internal control. So all these will have to show before we can declare the sample positive. If any of them shows contrary to what we are expecting, it is invalid. The result is inconclusive. It has to be repeated. Especially the internal control. Internal control will tell us that the sample quality is good, the sample processing went the right way. If there's a hitch,
you've talked about
will not show up.
You've talked about not ruling out the fact that sometimes there could be challenges, because when Dr. Okoboy, now Deputy Minister of Health, was here and the question was put in for an explanation, what he told us, and something you're saying also, is the fact that in all tests it's not 100% foolproof. There could be some little errors that could happen in there, right?
Yes.
So there is the possibility that you can actually have a test which is positive but come out as negative, right?
Oh, that's why I say that we have the internal checks. Yes, assuming the technician or the research assistant accidentally inputting in a well a sample that is meant for well A, maybe put it in well B. That means you are going to report B as positive instead of A. That could happen. I'm not saying that it could not, but you see, we have the checks against that. It could be 1 in 1,000, 1 in 2,000. It's rare that we have this. But when we have results that has to be verified by people like us as the supervisors and all that, because we look at the results, consider so many things, check the controls and all that before we can verify and the results goes out. I can't say that it's 100% foolproof. There could be mistakes, but it is minimal because of the checks that we have in the system.
We certainly would come back, because when we return after this, after our final break, one of the things we need to look at also has to do with double testing, because we know that in some, in many of the tests that are run when it comes to viral diseases, after a first test, even if you test positive, you're giving the chance to test again. Sometimes when you test negative also, you're giving a chance to test again to actually check whether or not, the right test is what is being communicated to you. We'll find out whether that is done, but after this short break. This is UPfront on JoyNews, and we'll be right back after this break. All right, so welcome back from our final break. We still have Dr. Kofi Bonny here with us, who's a senior research fellow at the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research. So let's just do this in the final 4 minutes that is left, Dr. Kofi Bonny. So we're looking at one very important issue, which has to do with testing. I know that if I go to a hospital and I test positive for, say, HIV, hepatitis B, normally they'll run another test just to be sure that it is indeed the situation. Do I have that kind of if I could put it this way, luxury in the Noguchi Memorial Institute? If I test positive, is that the end? Or another test will be run to actually ensure that I am truly positive?
So the protocols that are in place has it that, if one tests positive, you have to quarantine, then you treat. That is the protocol. Then after a week, a second sample is taken to test, just to ascertain whether the person is still positive or is seroconverted, or is converting, it's changing from positivity to negativity. So if you do that and the person is negative, it doesn't end there. That's after the first test positive, second test negative. The protocol has it that you get 2 consecutive negative tests before one person can be declared negative. So after a first test, we don't end there. You have to do a second test, and probably if it's a second negative, if it's the first negative, you have to do another test to have 2 negatives before you can be declared as a virus-free or being cleared.
Yes, but my question was, so even before the 1 week of quarantine, immediately you run the test and I test positive, is another one around to, confirm more or less, because there are instances people, go to facilities, go to the labs and they test positive. Another test is done and it turns out that it's negative, even without taking
Oh, you're talking
drugs.
about confirmatory test. The
Yes.
PCR itself is confirmatory.
Okay.
I mean, it's one of the best tests that we have. So if we do the test and you are positive, yes, we can repeat if you want us to. Maybe you think that, oh, you are not truly positive. We can repeat if you want us to. But the most invariably, when we repeat, it will still be positive. You see, sometimes even you will get there's a number that comes with positivity. You will get if the lower the number, the higher the positivity. So you get a low number, and that because you see, we are talking about viruses growing or replicating within the system. So it will get to some viremic levels, that is, it increases as one begins to show symptoms. So if we test somebody who is mildly infected, not even showing symptoms, the virus, the number that we'll get will be very high. In other words, the viremic levels are low. But then as you progresses, if you test again after a day, the virus load or the viral load might have gone up a little. So the number we'll get will then be low. So in other words, your viral load has come up. So if you are asymptomatic, mostly you have a very high CT value, the value that we get, and that is a very low viral load. But then as the virus keep increasing in you get a higher viremic level.
Okay.
In other words, you can test and you can come and test again.
Okay.
But
So finally, Dr. Bonnie. So finally, Dr. Bonnie, for many of us, and the argument is always in town that once virus gets into your system, that's it, and that viruses do not die. If that is the case, how come? And there's an argument. I hope you just answer this for us finally, because people are sending questions about how come that we can say that, okay, so someone is eventually tested negative when we know, for instance, that if you contract, say, hepatitis B or HIV, that's the end of it.
Yeah. Sorry?
Yes, I'm just asking that, so we know that if you contract HIV or hepatitis B, you become, positive forever. How different is this finally?
So the two viral conditions that you mentioned, we call them the chronic viruses. You see, so there's some chronicity with it. In other words, when you get it, they become hidden in the body. So basically, you are going to live with them for a long time, especially if you become chronic. Yes, you'll be given medication to lower the viral load, but you still have it. For HIV, it's hidden. Okay. So they hide and infiltrate. That's how I call it. But the other viruses that they get cleared from the body.
Okay.
By the body's, what is called the antibodies, or neutralizing antibodies.
Okay.
So it's not all viruses that will not die. Some of them get cleared from the body.
All right, Dr. Kofi Bonnie, thank you so much for joining us. We're grateful you joined us today to help us have a better understanding of, the testing system when it comes to COVID-19. That'll be all from us today on Upfront. My name is Winston. I'm on behalf of Sami Odami and Papaya Wasari. Thank you very much. Do have a lovely day.